everyone, this is Lomi, and I've said before that sundresses are one of my favorite things to sew for dolls, so as we're heading into summer, it's the perfect time to make one for another size of doll. I've designed this pattern to hopefully fit a variety of slim minis. It'll overlap farther in the back for dolls that have a very small waist. As usual, the pattern is free on my website, and you can find a link to my pattern archive in the video description. I have all my pieces ready, including a lining for the bodice. I've marked darts on the lining and the bodice fabric, and I get started by folding and pinning those darts. I sew the darts going up from the bottom edge to the peak of the dart. You'll need to either knot your thread by hand at that point, or else backstitch at the point to ensure it won't be pulled apart. Knotting by hand is less bulky, but I've found on this particular pattern the dart is shallow enough that it doesn't hurt to use a backstitch. Then I pin the lining back pieces to the front at the shoulder, with right sides together, and sew the shoulder seams. Once it's sewn and loose threads are trimmed, I finger press the shoulder seams open and the lining is done. I move on to the bodice outer fabric, sewing the darts and attaching the shoulders the same way. I didn't use pins on the outer fabric today. I found this material is a little heavier and it stays together really nicely without shifting, so it wasn't necessary for this step. Some people never pin anything, and some people pin everything, and sometimes you end up kind of playing it by ear. All those strategies are valid depending on your comfort level and also what you're sewing with on any particular day. Once again, I trim up all the threads, then finger press the shoulder seams open. Now the bodice can be assembled with the lining, putting the bodice outer fabric and the lining together with right sides together. I pin around the armholes and the neck, and also down the straight seam of the back opening. For this step, I'll sew around each of the armholes, up one side of the back, around the neckline, and down the other side of the back. This leaves just the sides and the bottom edge of the bodice open for now. When sewing very small things, it helps to go slowly, and if you have difficulty turning pieces, consider using tweezers to help guide or steer them. Another common problem is fabric on tiny doll garments getting sucked down into the machine. For that, depending on your machine and what's available for it, you might be able to find an alternate throat plate that has a smaller hole for the needle. Or you can put tearaway stabilizer underneath your fabric, which helps keep the fabric from getting pulled down into the machine. If you can't find stabilizer, you can also use thin paper. After my threads are trimmed, I notch the edges of the curved neck and armholes and trim the corners of the seam allowance at the back of the neck. From here, it's time to turn the bodice right side out. For this, I use a safety pin. I put the pin through the seam allowance at the bottom corner of the back. Then fold it to the inside between layers of fabric, and feed it through the gap between layers in the shoulder. Once the pin pulls a little tail of fabric through, I can grab the fabric and pull the bodice right side out. I make sure my seams are neatly turned, and then pull the other side the same way. If you can find them, safety pins that don't have a coil at the base are great for this because there's nothing for the fabric to get caught or pinched in. The side of the front and back is still open, so I put it together with right sides together, bodice outer against itself, and the lining against itself, and then sew the side closed. On small clothes, this can be delicate work, so make sure none of the fabric gets caught in your seam. I close the other side the same way. Now the bodice is complete and we can move on to the skirt. The skirt is just one long rectangle of fabric, but it would be possible to attach a circle skirt or an A-line skirt to change the silhouette. For now, the pattern just has a basic rectangle though, so I begin by using a zigzag stitch to finish the bottom edge. After zigzagging, I fold the bottom edge up by about 1/4 inch and pin it in place. I'm not going to sew the bottom hem just yet though. Before I do, I grab some lace and pin it on so the lace will be sewn on at the same time the hem is made. This saves some time and effort and gives a nice clean result. I clip the threads and then finish the sides of the skirt with a zigzag stitch. The skirt is long enough that I can fold it and do both sides at once pretty easily. Then, like with the bottom hem, I fold the edge in about 1/4 inch and sew it in place. For this, I backstitch at the bottom edge because the rear opening always needs a little extra reinforcement. The next step is gathering the skirt. I do this by setting the stitch length on my machine to the longest, which is about 4 millimeters, and running a line of stitches along the top edge of the skirt while pinching the top thread between my fingers. This increases the tension just enough to force it to gather without having to muck around with changing my machine's tension settings, which can be really finicky. Just don't go too fast or you'll give yourself a friction burn on your fingers. If the machine gathering isn't quite enough, you can separate the threads at the end of the seam and pull the top thread a little tighter to gather it a bit more. Then it's time to connect the skirt to the bodice. I pin the skirt to the exterior of the bodice with right sides together. I start by pinning the ends into the ends of the bodice and then smoothing the ruffles between them. Then, with the bodice lining folded back and out of the way, I sew the bodice front and the skirt together. After the skirt is attached, the bodice lining can be folded so the raw edge is to the inside, and this can be sewn in place by machine or by hand. I sew by machine today and figure if I miss any edges, I'll fix it by hand later on. To complete the back of the dress, I put the sides of the skirt together with right sides together and sew from the bottom until about 1.5 inches down from the waist, backstitching at the bottom edge where I get started, and then turning to sew off the side and backstitch, which creates a rear opening that folds neatly on itself and remains completely closed. Now the sewing part is done, and the dress can be finished by adding embellishments if desired, and also by adding snaps to the back for a custom fit, overlapping the back of the dress as much as necessary to fit your doll. This way, every dress is custom fitted to a specific doll, and that lets the pattern fit a variety of bust sizes and waist measurements without having to alter the pattern itself. That's all for today though. Thanks for watching. Bye.